In the summer of 1914, a single event set the world on fire. A gunshot, fired on a quiet Sunday morning in Sarajevo, would bring empires to their knees and drag an entire generation into the bloodiest conflict humanity had ever seen. This is the story of that moment, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and how a chain of decisions, alliances, and human errors turned a local tragedy into a global catastrophe. Welcome to Moments in History. At the dawn of the 20th century, Europe was a continent on edge. Empires ruled millions: the British, the French, the Russian, and the Austro-Hungarian. Each was proud, powerful, and increasingly afraid of losing that power. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, ruled from Vienna, was vast but unstable. It was home to dozens of nationalities: Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Croats, Serbs, and many others. They spoke different languages, worshipped differently, and often wanted independence from Vienna. The empire was held together by diplomacy, bureaucracy, and the aging Emperor Franz Joseph, who had ruled since 1848. But time was running out. Industrialization, nationalism, and ethnic pride were shaking the old order. And nowhere was that more evident than in the Balkans. The Balkans had long been called the powder keg of Europe. It was a region of fierce rivalries and overlapping claims, where religion, ethnicity, and empire collided. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire had dominated the region. But by the late 1800s, Ottoman control was collapsing. As it withdrew, new nations emerged: Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, Montenegro. Each dreamed of uniting all Slavs under its flag. Among them, Serbia was the most ambitious. Inspired by its victories in the Balkan Wars, Serbia sought to unite all South Slavs, especially those still under Austrian rule in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But there was a problem. Bosnia had been annexed by Austria-Hungary in 1908. Serbia and its ally Russia protested furiously, but the annexation stood. For Serbian nationalists, this was a humiliation and an injustice that had to be avenged. Into this volatile world stepped Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. Born in 1863, he was intelligent, proud, and often blunt. Many in Vienna found him difficult, yet he was also a reformer. He dreamed of transforming the empire into a federation, giving more autonomy to its diverse peoples. Ironically, that vision might have eased ethnic tensions, including those in Bosnia. But to Serbian nationalists, Franz Ferdinand represented the empire itself, a symbol of oppression that stood in the way of a greater Slavic union. In June 1914, the Archduke planned a visit to Sarajevo, the Bosnian capital, to observe military exercises. The date was set for June 28, a Sunday. For most, it was an ordinary day, but for Serbs, June 28, Vidovdan, or St. Vitus Day, was sacred. It marked the anniversary of the 1389 Battle of Kosovo, a defining moment in Serbian history. Choosing that date for a military parade in Bosnia was a mistake. It was seen by many Serbs as an insult. In the shadows of Belgrade, a secret organization was watching. Its members were soldiers, officers, and students devoted to one goal: the creation of a greater Serbia. They called themselves Unification or Death, but the world would know them as the Black Hand. Led by Colonel Dragutin Dimitrijevic, known by his codename Apis, the group had already carried out assassinations inside the Balkans. Now, they saw a new opportunity: the Archduke's visit to Sarajevo. In early June, 7 young men, mostly students, were recruited and armed with pistols and hand grenades. Among them was Gavrilo Princip, a quiet, sickly 19-year-old with deep nationalist convictions. They were smuggled across the border into Bosnia with the help of sympathetic officials. Their mission: to kill Franz Ferdinand. None of them realized they were about to change the course of world history. The morning of June 28, Sarajevo woke to a bright summer morning. Crowds filled the streets, waving flags as the royal motorcade made its way through the city. The Archduke sat beside his wife, Sophie, Duchess of Hohenberg, smiling and waving to the public. They had been warned of danger, but neither believed anyone would attack them in daylight. Security was minimal: 6 cars, a few soldiers, and a handful of police officers. Along the route, the young assassins waited. Each carried a pistol and a small bomb. They were nervous, inexperienced, and scattered along the Apple Quay, the main street running beside the Miljaska River. At 10:10 a.m., the first assassin, Nedeljko Vabranovia, threw his bomb. It bounced off the Archduke's car and exploded under the next vehicle. 2 officers were wounded. Franz Ferdinand's car sped away. Vabranovia swallowed cyanide and jumped into the river. But the poison was old, and the river was barely knee-deep. He was dragged out and arrested immediately. The other assassins, confused and panicked, failed to act. It seemed the attempt had failed. The Archduke insisted on continuing his visit. He wanted to check on the wounded officers at the hospital. However, his driver was not informed that the route had been changed. At 10:45 a.m., the convoy made a wrong turn onto Franz Joseph Street. When the driver tried to reverse, the engine stalled. At that exact moment, Gavrilo Princip, who had given up earlier and stopped for a sandwich, found himself just meters away. He stepped forward, drew his pistol, and fired 2 shots. The first struck Sophie in the abdomen, the second hit Franz Ferdinand in the neck. Both were mortally wounded. As the car sped toward the governor's residence, the Archduke whispered to his wife, "Sophie, don't die, stay alive for our children." By 11 a.m., they were both dead. The city fell into shock. Crowds gathered in silence. At first, no one could believe it. Then, anti-Serb riots broke out. Shops were looted, and dozens were killed or beaten. The assassins were quickly arrested. Under interrogation, they admitted their ties to nationalist circles in Serbia, but denied direct government involvement. It didn't matter. In Vienna, the crime was seen as an act of Serbian aggression, a challenge that could not go unanswered. The fuse had been lit. News of the assassination spread across Europe within hours. Most governments reacted with sympathy and fear. Everyone knew what such an event could mean in a continent held together by fragile alliances. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia directly. But before taking action, Vienna turned to its most powerful ally, Germany. On July 5, Kaiser Wilhelm II promised full support, giving Austria what became known as the blank check. Encouraged, Austria drafted an ultimatum to Serbia, one so harsh it was meant to be rejected. On July 23, the ultimatum was delivered. Serbia had 48 hours to accept 10 demands, including allowing Austrian officials to operate inside Serbia. It was a violation of national sovereignty, something no government could accept. Yet Serbia, backed by Russia, tried to compromise. It accepted most of the demands, but rejected the one that infringed on its independence. That was enough. On July 28, 1914, exactly 1 month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. The system of alliances built over decades now began to collapse in days. July 30, Russia began mobilizing its army to defend Serbia. August 1, Germany declared war on Russia. August 3, Germany declared war on France. August 4, German troops invaded Belgium, prompting Britain to declare war on Germany. In less than a week, Europe was engulfed in war. What had begun as a regional conflict in the Balkans now involved every major power on the continent. The Great War, the First World War, had begun. The war that followed lasted more than 4 years. It killed an estimated 17 million people and wounded another 20 million. Empires collapsed, the German, the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, and the Russian. Entire societies were reshaped. And when it ended, the world that emerged was darker, more divided, and haunted by loss. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 redrew borders and sowed the seeds for future conflict, including another world war, just 2 decades later. Gavrilo Princip never saw the scale of what he had started. Too young for the death penalty under Austrian law, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He died of tuberculosis in 1918, just months before the war ended. In his cell, he wrote, "I am a Serb and I love my people. Whatever I did for them." To some, he was a hero, to others, a murderer. But to history, he was the man whose bullets shattered an empire and changed the 20th century. Looking back, it's easy to see the assassination as inevitable. The result of long-simmering tensions, tangled alliances, and human pride. But history is never inevitable. It is made by choices, by moments. On June 28, 1914, in Sarajevo, one of those moments arrived. And from it, the world would never be the same.